Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Battle Styles, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be closing the chapter on the Battle Styles format. Chilling Reign is on its way. I'm actually going to a pre-release this weekend, the first time I'm going to a shop to do Pokemon things in a long time. I'm really excited about it. But before we jump into the Chilling Reign stuff on the channel, we want to really close out Battle Styles and really get the conclusions here. For our set review, see how right we are, how wrong we are. It's always a bit of fun, but also look about some of these cards and how we believe they could be performing with the sort of hindsight now of Chilling Reign and if the meta is going to be warping for any of these cards. So let's jump into it. We actually did 3 parts of this set review because Battle Style was such a packed set. So you can go back and look at all of those and actually hear the full mentality around why we gave these ratings. But for now, I'm going to be talking about how these cards ended up doing. By the way, community ratings aren't yet up for Chilling Reign. I'm actually looking to find someone who can help do some English scans for these cards. We're actually so close now to pre-releases that we might be getting those scans pretty soon. So I might actually hold off on the community ratings until then. But bear in mind, the set review is coming very, very soon, trust me. And we are going to be jumping into the Chilling Reign format stuff very soon. So just bear with us for now. I've been doing a lot of things. You can see the background slightly different. I'm actually in a new house now as well. So stuff's been going on. But we're back, ready to start talking Chilling Reign. But today we're going to be talking about how these cards ended up doing. Starting off with the trainers, we have Billowing Fan, rated it a 4 out of 5 star. This actually didn't end up seeing play in Pikarom, which is one of the first places I expected it to see play. It did see some cameo appearances in things like Victini VMAX for a good amount of time. Every now and then you'd see it in random like tech include spots, but I don't think it's actually living up to the expectation right now that we had of like the enhanced hammer meta. Really a lot of decks play Crushing Hammer just so they can slow down ADP. That's pretty much the long and short of it. So you don't need Billowing Fan in that ADP matchup. At the same time, there's that ebb and flow. As soon as you start seeing Eternatus players using things like Capture Energies and Hiding Darkness, the Billowing Fans get teched in, and then people make their changes out to make the Billowing Fans useless. So it's one of those things to keep in check. It can still get you a lot of value in a good amount of decks right now, but it feels more like a 1 to 2 count speculatively in things like, yeah, Victini. Sometimes Pikarom would make the space for it, but not too many other decks actually ended up making the space for Billowing. So a little bit on the lower side. I think I dropped this down to like a 3-star kind of realm. Coming into the new sets, I think there's a lot more sort of basic energy style builds. There's going to be Shadow Rider Calyrex, which is obviously going to use a lot of basic psych energies for their acceleration and draw. Even Ice Rider will probably be using basic energies for the synergy with Melanie. And I don't foresee many archetypes changing or wanting to add in Billowing Fan. Again, decent tech include does depend on how the meta develops, of course. But at the moment, it's more of a maybe card than actually expected in lists. Next up, Camping Gear. We all know this is terrible. Energy Recycler. I think we can probably drop this even further. I think most Boom Eggrow decks, they are pretty strong, but I don't think they actually play Recycler because they're just so focused now on a tag team just kind of like sticking and then making like a second one for only 3 energy. You don't actually play the Recycler, you end up just playing 1 to 2 Ordinary Rods and that's it. And Frostmoth builds aren't really a thing at all right now. So yeah, I would probably bump Recycler down that one space. I can't foresee it changing too much going forward. No, I don't think it's going to make it in anything like Calyrex or anything. So yeah. Escape Rope is indeed a 5 out of 5 for sure. It's found its way into ADPization just to have more push out the way kind of deals so you can get around big VMAXs from the opponents. Just take any prizes on an ultimate ray. It's always good value for you. A lot of fire archetypes take advantage of Escape Rope actually for that ADP matchup as well because it's hard for them to hit 300, but it's easier for them to deal with the Denes, Crobats, and Zacians and Morwils that are played from the ADP side. You can find it in all sorts of different archetypes, very reasonable in Urshifu, reasonable in Pikarom, reasonable in Mad Party as well, trying to improve that ADP matchup. Gives you an additional switch out to the 2 air balloons, and it, again, can push an ADP out the way, which is really nice. So this also did actually have the cameo with Spiritomb as well. This was like a small rogue deck. It ended up winning a tournament in this format, and it was also played in the global finals of the Players' Cup. So Escape Rope had real cool cameos. We pretty much got this spot on, to be honest, and I foresee the card continuing in the future to be very, very strong. Level Ball also is a justified 5-star. It did actually pull Mad Party up the tier list quite substantially and made it solidly within the top 10 almost the entire Battle Stars format. This is partly down to the type coverage that you gained into the Urshifu matchup, although it ended up that Mad Party actually had to double tech a Mew to make that matchup still favorable, because the snipe pressure from Urshifu is still pretty awkward, and they even have turn 1 pressure. Just hitting with their regular V and jumping back to the bench is often taking a prize card on Bunnelbees and such, and they also played like Zigzagoon Net, so by no means like in the bag, but certainly a matchup that you appreciate seeing more than others. So Level Ball really helped pole vault Mad Party into much higher echelons. We also saw that there was a lot more Munchlax and Cincino being used. We know that there's, of course, Rapid Strike builds using Cincino and trying to really embody the old Acerola / Guzma approach that the Zoroark decks used to take, where now you have Cheryl and you have Boss, and you're trying to use Urshifu jumping in and out as well. Munchlax has also seen play alongside things like Pidgeotto as well, thanks to the Level Ball introduction, and it has made some random VMAXs actually quite viable for stalling approaches. We've seen Centiskorch VMAX in the hands of Sander, and we've also seen, I believe it was Pedro who sort of started popularizing the Snorlax VMAX engine that also had Pidgeotto and like Power Pads and Cheryls and just the 4 triple accelerations as an archetype. So all of these things, again, did kind of come true. Frostmoth obviously fell by the wayside. I think Excadrill is not the most popular way to control people anymore, even though you have better search for Drillbur and Cincino. It feels like the type coverage of fighting became mostly taken up by Rapid Strike and not much else. Spiritomb again had that cameo, and Salazzle obviously not too much, but really this was just a slide saying about all the options here. And I think Mad Party carrying and Cincino / even Pidgeotto now in a lot of cases, having extra search just made these decks way more viable. So yeah, very valid 5-star. I think going forward, possibly some Path to the Peak engines will try and weave in Pidgeotto / Cincino, or possibly even Inteleon with the new Rapid Shooter Inteleon, I think it's called, that does the 20 damage pings around the board. It may entice people to start playing a Level Ball engine where you can get Sobbles and Drizzles out quite quickly and efficiently. So yeah, I foresee Level Ball to still have a good amount of play in the format. Vitjar, and basically all of the single strike package, we slapped a 4-star rating on for the purpose of the set review, thinking that it would be around the sort of tier 2 archetype. It actually fell a little bit lower. I would call this more of a tier 3 archetype. I think it's stat-wise in like the top 20 of decks, which isn't that good really as a performing archetype. It does have a lot of power behind it, and I think its type covering actually might get a little bit more interesting in the next format, because you can easily tech in things like Tyranitar V, and there's even a new single strike Seviper coming in the new format, so you can play this sort of dark plus fighting deck all in one sort of mesh, which can help you out against this sort of rock, paper, scissors a lot of people are touting, where you have fighting type coverage for the Eternatus, but you also have the dark coverage for the Shadow Rider, and also because single strike can one-hit KO other VMAXs, you can still have good output in like general meta. So I do foresee single strike not like completely falling off a cliff, but I do think as more decks come out, this becomes a little bit less viable. So in general, I'm going to be moving the single strike cards down a notch to that 3-star sort of premise. The only thing I will say is that I'm quite excited for a Seviper style build, which is not actually using the VMAX. It's just trying to use the regular Vs and Seviper as an engine. And you feel more Malamar-esque then when you're just swinging with basics that just expect to get knocked out, and then you use Vitality Jar, Houndoom to establish your next one. So that's potentially interesting. And Single Strike does gain some cool new stuff from Chilling Reign, so not saying it completely like peters off, but it's probably moving away from the direction of just playing pure tanky VMAX, in my opinion. EXP Share is an interesting one. It did end up seeing a small amount of play in some Eternatus builds. A few Zacian ADPs attempted this, but it didn't really overshadow things like just Air Balloon and the Sword. There were a handful of other archetypes that were just trying to like sneak it in. I think at the moment it's a little bit below the bar. I think 3-star is relatively close to where I want to put it, because it's more of like an experimental card. It's not like guaranteed in anything right now that I can think of. Definitely not in the top echelons. There was some Urshipulse playing it for a little while. And there's a few... Basically, decks can just add it in as like a 1 or 2 count, and it's like okay, but never like insane. Going forward, there could be an Energy Swarm approach of Shadow Rider that's trying to use EXP shares to maintain essentially damage as you use things like Cresselia to power up energies initially, and then the XP shares keep those energies around in play so that your damage ends up in like the 330, 360 kind of realm where you can one-shot VMAXs. I think that's kind of a dreamer approach of Ghost Rider and not my favorite way to play it right now. So I don't think the XP share is going to be hugely impacted in the future. Let's move on to the next one. We have Raging Scroll, another one of these cards that is just a kind of like include into a single strike VMAX, but nothing really new from the set is going to be taking advantage of this card. So again, drop it down to that 3-star. Tool Jammer has seen a little bit more than experimentation, actually. I think it's a slightly more reasonable card. Some people were subbing this in over Big Charm in builds that were using things like Guzhala. Things like Boom Mewtwo may sometimes use this to try and shut off opponents from using air balloons, Big Charms of their own, as well as damage mods like Vitband and like the Sword. Some Eternatus players actually did play this as well. I think more often than not, it was things that were using Mewtwo, though, a lot of the time. That ended up sort of petering out as we realized that we needed to start playing Stealthy Hoods, but that kind of went in an ebb and flow in the format as well. So yeah, I mean, it's not in a huge amount of decks still. It's kind of this like neat card, so you could put it between like 2 and 3 maybe on a positive approach. I feel like it's not really expected in any archetype, but it has seen some highlight reel moments. And I know that people using that Guzhala package were taking advantage of this as being an upgrade to just gaining health from things like Big Charm. Whirlpool Scroll, obviously terrible. Bruno, we rated the 3-star. We'll bump this down to a 1-star. There were no non-single strike decks that actually wanted to put this in, and the Primeape deck didn't work out. The one thing I will say is that Survivor has the upside of 90 damage when you play a single strike supporter card, and I can foresee Bruno being one of the focal points for that. And of course, we're gaining Versus Seeker to make this more live more often, so you can cherry pick him for the right moment and get the full effect of draw 7, which is quite decent. So going down to 1 for this Battle Stars format, but then expecting myself to at least get baited into playing it a little bit with Survivor. I've gone the wrong direction. We have Cheryl. Cheryl's a 4-star card, I believe, still, but in a weird way. I actually did have Snorlax and Urshi, some of the 2 main users of this, all in the slide. But I was also giving credit to Bronzong variants, which really didn't end up working out. There were not even any like ADP Bronzong. Most people just wanted to go Streamline ADP instead, because 4 turns is always a good win condition, or 3 if you turn 1 GX or whatever. Weavile obviously didn't want to use it with Eternatus. Snorlax did end up seeing play alongside like a Pidgeotto style approach, more as sort of a rogue Mimi thing, but it is actually quite a strong archetype, I think, and is underplayed. There's also the Centiskorch VMAX, which tries to do a similar thing, where you're using Memory Capsule to just remove an energy every turn with, what's it called, Burning Heater or something? Can't remember what the Centiskorch V's attack is. But anyway, you're getting rid of an energy from them and yourself each turn, and just trying to spam that Cheryl to undo their damage. Urshifu ended up having a Cincino approach to really incorporate the Cheryl. Now, every now and then you can see one in the Jirachi builds. It's just less easy to pull off. But when there was a lot of Urshifu being hyped towards the early part of Battle Styles, it was a Mirror Tech card, which was quite powerful. So yeah, it kind of flopped on the Bronzong and Weavile approach, where you just get to Cheryl for free, essentially. But alongside some VMAXs, it was a nice supplementary supporter. I think going forward, the Calyrex won't be able to use Cheryl too well. Possibly something like Blaziken VMAX could be using a Cheryl approach, similar to how Snorlax is currently working, because it can accelerate to the bench, re-establishing the energies you remove with Cheryl, or you can like pay retreat Cheryl and then reattach with a different Blaziken. Kind of dancing with the Cheryl is the idea. But I think the groundwork has been laid, really, where we're trying to play Cincino / Pidgeotto plus Munchlax and like Palpad and a bunch of Cheryl, and be an annoying wall to deal with. I also think Sandaconda variants may be trying to use Cheryl, because it just has a 1 energy spreading attack, and it's got natural synergy with Cheryl. At the same time, even the second attack is essentially the same as Gardevoir Sylveon, where you can move energies off yourself to sort of bait your opponent into hitting into you. If they don't have a gusting opportunity, you can just insta-Cheryl that Sandaconda, move it out the active and whatever. So yeah, more potential options for Cheryl. I think this is going to be like a format-defining card eventually, because it just will make, the amount of hit points that we have, things that can't get knocked out that can abuse this just become insane. And I think we've only just started to uncover that as an option altogether. And it's really only ADP that's keeping this line in check, because right now people can GX and get through just Pidgeotos and Cinccino's before a number of Cheryls like outraces them kind of thing. Or you're just like natural hitting into them is gonna outrace them. But once ADP rotates, you can't just keep bossing one prizes and keep up in a race where their three prizes hitting into your three prizes. So that will eventually become a really oppressive strategy, I think. So yeah, bear that in mind. Karina's motivation, we actually grossly overrated. The community had it a little bit lower than us, and we first thought that, well, a lot of people had the idea that Octillery was going to be the out-the-box way to play Urshifu. Turned out we had to go lower, even to the ground, and just have Jirachi instead. We were playing Karina's motivation as a stamp-proofing mechanism to give yourself options to great catcher for game, or find your last switch out, or your rapid strike energy for game, what have you. So it was exactly in here to make the most of an Octillery engine. Now, I think pre-rotation, we won't be seeing an Octillery engine anytime soon. But post-row, I do think this engine will surpass anything like a Snorlax approach or anything like that. So Karina's motivation, didn't see much play at all in this format, like 2-star play kind of thing, really on the rogue side of things. But I can see it being a post-row card, basically. The mustards are exactly terrible, both 1-star. Phoebe, we actually grossly underrated. So we had on the slide what this is beating, and the one reason I didn't have Eternatus on this slide was because you couldn't Eldegoss for Phoebe in the Eternatus deck, but people ended up saying that, adding a Power Pad or a Sinlin is good enough for me to just get through a Zamazenta one time, and that's enough to swing the Luke Metal matchup into around the 40% range, which is actually a buff from where it was previously around the 25 to 30% win rate. It bumped all the way up to like a low 40% win rate, which is really nice actually for Eternatus, seeing as though that was touted as like a really bad matchup for Return, and pre-Urshifu was one of the worst matchups like that anyone could play against you. So really we just misshot the fact that I thought VMAXs needed to have Eldegoss to spam Phoebe enough times, but Sinlin was a good enough card. Power Pad was a good enough card when Zamazenta and Decidueye give you enough time to find the Phoebe and reload it again and actually use it. Mostly because they find it hard to like boss up your stuff and really race you that aggressively. So you can chill and eventually dig towards the second usage of this card. So yeah, I think, as long as Decidueye is still around, we're probably going to need Phoebe. So we'll bump this all the way up to a 4-star as more VMAXs become relevant. More of them want to have answers to an army of Decidueye, and oftentimes Phoebe plus reload with Eldegoss is going to be more reasonable than trying to just have like 4 basic attacking Pokemon that can somehow deal with Decidueye, because Desi's got Crafty. They currently play things like Big Charm, Wheat Guard, and all this other stuff, and like Malolanas and whatnot. So there's only very few particular Pokemon that deal with Desi, and people then can like tech for the tech. We've seen things like Basculin with Dojo and other such plays. So people will try and like tech for the tech, but Phoebe is just like, surprise, you're dead. Like you actually can't play around the Phoebe. You're just trying to like money them out of it, or just race them before they're able to spam it. But it's not super easy. So yeah, Phoebe is probably going to be a necessary evil in VMAX decks going forward. Tower of Darkness, we rated 4-star. I think we bring that down again in line with the rest of the single strike deck that ended up being more towards a 3-star. Primeape obviously wasn't good enough. It was just too janky right now. Single strike was, for the most part, still playing Tower. It wasn't beaten out by Dojo. Damage-wise, it was actually the Rapid Strike deck that was playing Dojo. But Tower could, again, be a reasonable card with some potentially decent single strikers coming out in the new set. But we'll drop this down to 3-star alongside the other single stuff. Tower of Waters, we rated that 4-star. Again, this was identifying Octillery as the build of Urshifu at the time. That was the one we were all testing with. That's what we'd seen from Japan, etc. But this ended up petering out in favor of the Dojo that we did say on the slide was basically the only challenger to this card. And it ended up being that Dojo is really important for a couple specific matchups, really important in fire matchups, so that you can hit 190 into things like Victini and Heatran for their early pressure plays. You can actually deal with them and put them as a deterrent from taking an early 1-prize KO on Jirachi, which is actually a really big deal. You can come straight back at them with a 2-prize response KO if you're able to find the Dojo and the basic energy. It also meant that you could 2-shot VMAXs just in general. Gale Thrust plus Gale Thrust Dojo gets you there. If you're behind, or if you've set it early, you can hit 320 over 2 turns. So yeah, that damage mod was super relevant and important enough to put in. Over the tower, going forward, I'm actually quite interested in the builds with Persimmon and Telescopic Sight, because I think that G-Max Rapid Flow doing 280 damage snipes is a really, really big deal. And obviously, if you're using Telescopic Sight, you can't use Air Balloon. So trying to find switch outs in other means outside of tools could mean that either we're playing 4 rope for switch, or it could mean we're starting to put in stadiums like Tower of Water. And I think that's a very reasonable option because we also want to have multiple bounces to Path to the Peak. So I have been testing some builds once again of Rapid Strike in the new format, even Jirachi builds that are playing 3/4 copies of Tower of Waters actually as a pivoting option, because I believe your damage now can come from bench buffs rather than dojo jumping you 40 damage. You can use Sight and Persimmon to jump up 60 damage, which is a good trade-off. Rapid Strike energy is obviously what cracks Urshifu. Rapid Strike did end up being it's a top 3 deck in the format right now. It's just behind ADP and Eterna in terms of points earners, and they are very impressive with the number of top 8s they've accumulated. So yeah, it's the real deal of a deck, and Rapid Strike the energy is one of the focal points for that, so you can spam that Rapid Flow. Single Strike energy will drop down to 3-star alongside the rest of the single strikers, but do bear in mind you can see 2 great type coverages here, Dark and Fighting, and if people are touting the Rock, Paper, Scissors, Single Strike can sit quite nicely in that sort of loop, so yeah, bear that in mind. So that wraps out the trainers. Let's jump into the V and VMAXs. Flapple, obviously terrible. We'll move on to that one. Kricketune, 4-star was what we initially rated this card. I think that's a little bit optimistic. Let's think about what archetypes actually ended up playing Kricketune. I feel like it's things like Victini variants can choose to play this right now. Rillaboom Eggrow / like Mewtwo Rillaboom plays this, and it's actually like a real focal point in that archetype, so maybe that's what's saving this rating right now. Some like Dragapult builds can choose to play it, but not a lot. So yeah, I think I'm mostly saved by like Rillaboom actually for Kricketune of all things. Now I think going forward there's the potential for a Peony ADP style deck, and that will probably play like 2 copies of Kricketune, I want to say. One thing to bear in mind is that Path to the Peak does really hurt a Pokemon like this. We may end up having to stick with like Jirachi engines just because they work under Stadium lock essentially. It also has been competing with Oricorio, which is still stronger in the fire decks for now. For the most part, Silvally Senti isn't really a thing anymore, so Kricketune is kind of the second fiddle to Oricorio for the most part. I feel like again this is like just bags of potential, so don't want to drop it too low. I think 3 is probably like the lowest I can ever rate this, but Rillaboom Eggrow is, right now its results is like a top 10 deck, but I actually think it's underperforming because it's been doing really well in the Players' Cup actual qualifiers. I think Tord and Robin both played this to, I think, top 5 in Europe, both of them, playing Mewtwo Eggrow. So yeah, Kricketune, busted boy, draws lots of cards, and I can foresee him being the backbone of some Peony engines, which looks quite interesting going forward. Victini V and VMAX, we all knew that the regular V was going to be overshadowed by this Victini, and that's exactly the case. And yeah, Victini VMAX we rated 4-star. I think that's exactly where you want to put it. Could even argue this is a 5-star card. I know that we did have the huge bonus of Galarian Rapidash, which really has kicked Victini on that little bit more in this last 3 weeks or so, which has really bumped up Victini's numbers. I think pre-Rapidash, the Victini was sat around like the 7th or 8th best deck, whereas now it's up in the top 5 quite comfortably. So yeah, a little bit saved there, but ultimately we had a good enough package to make Victini work. Max Victory is still super intimidating, one of the most intimidating decks to come up against when they get to go first, because of that threat of boss Max Victory on any evolving V Pokemon and just denying energy attachments and all that good stuff. It has the aggressive Double Blaze option. It has Spit Shots. It now has Rapidash. It even had things like Stoutland as tech cards, includes for things like Mad Party in that deck's sort of height. And I think going forward, the deck seems very solid. There's potential to now play things like Echoing Horn in Victini to potentially keep forcing things like Crobats into play for easier prizes for you with boss. Because, again, you don't need to be spamming Welder the entire time with this deck, which is quite interesting. And a lot of people are touting this to be a post-rotation monster because there's basically no more tag teams, which is the only real threat for Victini right now. Some of your worst matchups are things like Pikarom and Mewtwo variants, and you can certainly improve those. Well, you don't improve them. The format gets better for you when those get out the way and you can just be hitting into Vs, right? So right now, 4 stars, pretty on the money. You could argue this is a 5, but keep an eye on it for rotation. I know a lot of people have picked them up early just because they are expecting it to be very, very strong. Next up, we have Empoleon. Really upset and confused by this card because I figured this was going to be a mainstay in Urshifu. And actually, with the rise of Victini recently, it does give me the impression that possibly post-rotation, Empoleon is forced into the decks to kind of interact with that Victini matchup. Especially when, again, I keep talking about rock, paper, scissors, you can't be taking an L to Ghost Rider as well as Victini. That feels like way too much of the sort of top decks in the format that you're not comfortable playing against, so possibly an Empoleon core is going to be good for you. I also think this ability gets stronger when there is part of the peak in the format. Sounds confusing, but it's because people are so terrified of playing only Crobats and Dedenes that they end up playing Jirachis / Snorlax, which then makes Empoleon a really amazing card to lead with because you're then shutting off that engine instead. So the indirect help of Path of the Peak can actually make Empoleon stronger. Potentially post-rotation, it's a stronger card again for interacting with exactly Victini. Next format, there is more synergy with Coco Prism Star because there's Zero Aura potential builds of Rapid Strike, and that could be a fellow home for Empoleon where you just play Zero Aura Empoleon and you try and aggro Swirling Slice and get Zero Aura up in the back. Welder builds of Rapid Strike did not end up working out. That was one of the lead things that I was actually testing before the set was released, and that was one of the main reasons why I liked Empoleon, was because it was a turn 1, 130 damage, and it turned out that you would rather pass in the active with the chance to Stellar Wish a second time with Rapid Strike Urshifu after all that, or you could just end up with an okay strafe kind of turn, you know. But I do still like the tempo of Swirling Slice when it comes off, and I also think that the strange bug on PTCGO also shortened the lifespan of Empoleon. No one wanted to touch it after the first couple of weeks because it didn't work in the game. So yeah, rip Empoleon. Coco V and VMAX was a terrible, terrible card. I think there was some highlight reel small tournaments with it, but yeah, I don't think it's very good at all. Mimikyu V didn't end up seeing play in Dragapult, didn't see any play in Whimsy, didn't see any play in Mewtwo, even though there was, well, it saw some minor play in the pure one attach per turn psychic builds of Mewtwo that was trying to Horror House and use Trev Noir and use Wishing Star from Jirachi to accelerate, and that was your only acceleration in the deck. And Mimikyu sometimes was like a niche one-off, but I want to drop this down to a 1. I don't think it's a strong enough option. Necrozma V1, don't see that changing even with Shadow Rider. There are better options. Rapid Strike, obvious 5-star. Card is absolutely crazy. I think going forward, even with Ghost Kali coming out, the deck won't go anywhere. If there's one thing we've learnt from Pikarom, from Eternatus, from all this other stuff, you kind of just shrug and say, I hope I hit this matchup less than other matchups, or I hope that my overall matchup spread is good enough that I can still get by, or try and have things like Echoing Horn, Telescopic Sight, Great Catchers, that sort of thing, to prey on the usage of Dedenne. One bit of good news is that Ghost Kali oftentimes puts down Gengar Mimikyu in their early game. Obviously a very scary card for you to come up against, but it can still be 2 shots by Gale Thrust, even through Resist. So that's at least something for you. So the idea is you can slowly get through a Gengar, deal with a Dedenne or a Crobat, and then hopefully Echoing Horn it back into play. So you still do have a race on your hands as the Ghost Rider, especially with that Jirachi GX still currently being a presence in the game. You can hopefully sit out of range of a Kali for a turn or two and still be okay there. I don't think you're instantly just like on your knees in that matchup. Yes, you probably need to draw better than them a lot of the time and have some good tempo turns, and it can feel like you'll get rolled in some of those occasions where you don't. But that's the nature of ×2 weakness format with this much hit points, right? But yeah, it's not going anywhere. I still feel like it'll be a top 5 deck in Chilling Reign meta. Single Strike will drop down to that 3-star, as I've mentioned a few times with all these sorts of cards. Tyranitar I'll bump up to a speculative 2-star for being in some builds of successful single strikers as like a 1 count. And I think that'll be more important when there is a Ghost Rider that is weak to Dark. Corviknight was very overshot by myself and the community. A lot of people actually had it right on the money at that sort of 3-star. I actually kind of want to put it lower, you know. I think it ended up being like the 19th best performing deck in the format. I've actually got the spreadsheet here. 25th best performing deck, if you can call it best. So yeah, I was actually very hype on this sort of archetype. I thought it was going to overshadow Zamazenta and Luke Metal as a whole. I thought it was basically going to be a new coat of paint in that regard, because I was expecting a few things that didn't end up panning out. I thought that Zamazenta was going to be under threat by Phoebe, is going to be under threat by, actually Single Strike at the time was one of the things, because it can wall break. And I thought that the extra hit points was important, and having Luster Body gave you the best chance to actually have a matchup against Fire. But it turned out that Zacian Luke Metal is able to still be a top 5 deck in the format, even with Victini being higher than it, and even with Tempozard, Reshi Blounds, whatever you want to call it, in the top 10 as well consistently. So yeah, Luke Metal just continues to shrug in the face of Fire and say, whoops, I lost. And Corviknight ended up being just too kind of clunky. I think a lot of people built this really greedily when the set first came out. I think people were trying like thick Bronzong, thick Corviknight, like 1 Zacian and like 3-4 Cheryls. And of course, that's just a concoction that will always brick. I think when I brought it back to like 3 Zacian, a 2-2 Corviknight, like a 3-2 Bronzong, it worked reasonably well. But still, you're having to play things like Pokegears to actually pick out Cheryl at the right time, and it was a little bit awkward. So yeah, Luke Metal's still the way to go. And I think even with the answers coming in Chilling Reign format with, well, Phoebe's like a natural answer that decks can add in. I think you're reasonable into the Ghost Rider matchup, even though they often times are playing tag teams. They're tag teams that don't easily deal with Zacians and easily deal with Zamazentas. And also, there's the Ice Rider potentially, which you're obviously going to be good into. I think you're a little bit worried about some Rapid Strike builds if they are playing Blaziken. Is there anything else that we're too scared of? Not massively. So yeah, it still seems fine for Luke Metal. Let's move on to our next VMAX. Stoutland had some highlight reels in Victini. I actually really liked playing this when there was a real height on Mad Party. It won a few tournaments in a row. I played like for a couple of weeks on the ladder with Stoutland in, and it was a really nice, cheesy kind of card. And it could be one of Victini's only real ways to balance up that sort of matchup going forward, but I don't foresee it doing much else. So let's jump onto the single prize card Pokemon, and this is where our pessimism wasn't pessimistic enough. Cheryl 1 star, absolutely terrible. Durant obvious 1 star. Bulu 1 star as well. Weaving Salazzle 1 star meme. Emball 1 star obviously. Mr. Rhyme Yamper, great video on the channel where we're bodying ADPs, but 1 star obviously. Kingdra, terrible. Octillery, we really overrated. I think it's a post-rotation card for now. I think there's no way that it'll see play when we still have Stellar Wish. We just have way too many good activations in the early turns. And at the end of the day, we're in a format where you can't whiff even a turn 1 Quick Ball. You can't whiff a turn 1 Communication. You need to have those 5 extra cards to try and hit that out. Otherwise, you're losing instantly on the spot. So Stellar Wish is integral right now. Boltund, obvious 1 star. Meowstic, terrible. Orbeetle has had some cool expanded stuff going on. But in standard, it is very bad. Mienshao, terrible. Primate, terrible. Clunky, unfortunately. Sandaconda, terrible. Golbat and Crobat, obviously terrible. Houndoom, we will drop down to that 3 star, knowing that he is bonkers and he is the only reason why any single strike deck will work in the first place and be the cornerstone. And cross our fingers that there's going to be a Survivor deck. I'm putting my neck on the line that I think it's going to be a good deck. but yeah. That's your Houndoom. Bronzong, we will drop down to 2. 2 sounds very harsh. Let me look at the stats before I go crazy on this guy. Where's the best? There's just none of them. Corviknight's like the best performing Bronzong deck, right? There's been like no Aurora Mewtwo's. There's been no like ADP Aurora boxes. The only real hope for Bronzong in the future is things like Blissey V, which is not really much hope at all. So yeah, we will drop Bronzong down to 2 stars. I'm amazed that this format doesn't have space for a card like this right now. The format is just, yeah, it's in a different world right now. It's a different stratosphere. It's a whole new game, basically. Indeedee, obvious 1 star. Perugly, 1 star. So yeah, basically, even this pessimistic of a view for the 1 prize ratings was still too optimistic. I think the highest or the best card of the 1 prizes ended up being Houndoom as a 3 star. Like Octillery, you could maybe argue it's like a 3, but I'd really say like it's a 2 star alongside Bronzong because they're just not seeing any play. And then post rotation, we can talk to Octillery. Bronzong is just not working out right now either. So yeah, basically really, really bad time to be a 1 prize Pokemon in the game. But overall, some interesting stuff coming in Chilling Reign. I think we weren't too far off on most of our ratings. I think things like Corviknight was one of our worst ratings, and Phoebe was a bad rating. But outside of that, we were pretty much on the money. So yeah, we are going to be prepping our stuff for Chilling Reign. Not only the set review, we're going to be doing a buy list, going to be doing what new archetypes are coming out, and then going into each of those archetypes, giving you the basic concept rundown, our initial lists. We've been testing a lot on tabletop, been doing some behind the scenes testing as well over the bank holiday weekend, had a few friends around, and we were doing all sorts of testing and discussing things together, and really got a good grasp of what we feel like the meta will look like. And because we are a little bit late right now on our set review, it gives us more time to prepare and more information that we can gather. So hopefully it's going to be one of the more accurate set reviews coming up. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Sorry for the small week hiatus, but we should be back for more videos soon. So thanks so much, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.